Okay, let's dive right into this. Listen, if you are preparing for the Cambridge AS and A-Level Accounting 9706 exam, you already know the stakes are incredibly high. Welcome to this exhaustive explainer masterclass on sources of finance for business entities. I am your master coach for this session, and look, we're going to start right out of the gate with a hard truth. Most smart, highly capable students, the ones who study for months, routinely drop absolutely easy marks on this specific topic. You know the feeling, right? You walk out of the exam hall feeling super confident, only to get your results on results day and realize you missed that top tier. Why does this happen? Well, it's because you're playing the wrong game. Over the next 15 to 20 minutes, we are going to completely rewire how you approach these high tariff questions. We're going to dissect complex 15-mark prompts, we'll master time allocation, deploy critical thinking strategies, and actually analyze peer problem solving, right here together. By the time we wrap up this masterclass, you won't just know the textbook facts. You're going to know exactly how to manipulate those facts to squeeze every single possible mark out of the examiner.
So let's start by looking through the examiner's lens. This is the big question. Why exactly do really smart candidates lose those easy marks? It essentially boils down to two massive pitfalls: a complete misunderstanding of multi-stage analysis and a failure to secure process-driven method marks. Think about it. When examiners are sitting in that marking room, staring at hundreds of papers, they aren't just scanning your page for a final correct number at the very bottom. In fact, you can get your final calculation entirely completely wrong, but still score heavily if your process is rock solid. Students tend to panic when they flip the page and see a massive 9 to 15 mark question because they struggle to link multiple stages of logic together. They treat a multi-stage question like a bunch of isolated bullet points, instead of building a cohesive financial narrative. The examiner desperately wants to see you break down a complex funding problem into logical steps, solve them systematically, and then step back to check for reasonableness. If you skip the necessary steps just to rush to the final answer, you literally bleed marks all over the page.
And honestly, this quote right here brilliantly illustrates exactly what we are up against. This is pretty much the golden rule of Cambridge accounting. The assessment framework prioritizes analytical depth over superficial breadth. So what does that actually mean for you when you're sitting in the exam? It means that rote memorization of a textbook list of finance sources, like just writing down the basic features of a debenture versus an ordinary share, is simply not enough anymore. Superficial breadth is knowing a tiny little bit about everything. It's surface level. But analytical depth, that is demonstrating a deeply connected, conceptual understanding that you can actively transfer to entirely unfamiliar, weird business contexts that the exam throws at you. You have to show absolute mastery of fundamental principles, logical reasoning, and evidence-based justification. The syllabus explicitly states that top-performing students exhibit this connected understanding. They don't just know the tools sitting in the toolbox, they know precisely which tool to pull out, exactly when to use it, and they can argue exactly why it's a better choice than the alternative.
Okay, so here is our exact roadmap for today's session. We'll start by deep diving into the examiner's lens. Then we'll move into the method mark strategy, tackle mastering analytical depth, unlock evaluative thinking, and finally, we'll expose the top 3 examiner traps so you can avoid them.
Let's kick things off with part 1, the examiner's lens, focusing specifically on those cognitive domains.
Right, so the assessment objectives for sources of finance actually target 3 distinct cognitive domains: knowledge, analysis, and evaluation. But as we navigate these, I literally cannot stress this next point enough. This is a massive examiner alert that I pulled straight from the principal examiner reports. The examiners themselves note year after year that candidates consistently confuse key terminology across these domains. The instruction from Cambridge here is crystal clear. You must explicitly define terms before using them in your extended responses. Listen, if you are analyzing gearing or liquidity or cost of capital, please do not just throw those buzzwords into a paragraph and assume the examiner knows that you know what they mean. Take a single sentence to define them briefly. It establishes that elite academic standard right out of the gate. Practical application in this subject is all about developing professional skills, and a huge part of that is using appropriate, precise professional accounting language. If your terminology is vague or sloppy, your analytical depth immediately collapses in the eyes of the examiner and they cap your grade.
Moving right along, let's get into part 2, the method mark strategy, and we're going to frame this around a deconstruction debate. To really deeply understand this strategy, I want you to imagine a deconstruction debate between 2 of our top hypothetical scholars who are sitting in a study suite right now, tackling a brutal, high-tariff 15-mark question. On one side of the table, we have Alex. Now, Alex is highly technical. He absolutely excels at extracting facts, punching numbers into the calculator, getting the math perfectly right, but he really struggles with open-ended evaluation. He hates writing essays.
On the other side of the table is Sam. Sam is a highly creative, big-picture thinker who constructs incredibly strong arguments, but honestly, she often loses her structural precision, messes up her timing, and makes silly calculation errors. So they are looking at this 15-mark prompt. Alex is tapping his pen, saying, look, we just need to calculate the gearing ratio and the interest cover. That's the math. Boom, we're done. But Sam pushes back. She says, no way, Alex. Look at the command word. It says evaluate. The math is just the foundation. We have to argue whether a bank loan or a rights issue is actually better for this specific company. To consistently unlock those top-tier marking bands, we're talking those coveted AO1, AO2, and AO3 marks, we need to completely merge Alex's factual mathematical precision with Sam's broader evaluative perspective. And to do this, they have to deploy this exact 6-step procedural framework you see on the screen. Let's walk through it. Step 1, deconstruct the question. Before you touch a calculator, you isolate the command word. Is it analyze, which means break it down, or is it evaluate, which means make a justified judgment? You find the hidden constraints of the prompt. Step 2, extract relevant data. Pull out the numbers you actually need from that massive wall of text. Step 3, select the analytical framework. Are we looking at liquidity ratios or investment appraisal? Step 4, execute with clear notation. This is for Alex. Lay out the math step by step so the examiner can follow your brain. Step 5, verify results. Always check for reasonableness. Does a 900% gearing ratio make sense? Probably not. Step 6, present with correct terminology. If you follow these 6 steps, you are actively gathering process marks at every single stage, completely insulating yourself from losing everything if a single calculation goes awry at the end.
So Alex and Sam are actively drafting their model response paragraph by paragraph using our 6-step framework. But suddenly, they hit a massive roadblock. They are running out of time, and they cannot figure out how to link their descriptive paragraphs into those high-scoring evaluative ones. It's a total bottleneck. Now, before we use a cognitive strategy to solve that exact roadblock and show you the flawless rewrite, I need you to pause, make sure you are subscribed to our explainer series right now at acetheexam_IGCSE. Hit that button and enable all notifications for weekly Cambridge breakthrough strategies exactly like this one. Listen, if you're genuinely serious about unlocking those top-tier A-star grades, you need consistent elite strategy in your feed. We are dissecting these exams week in and week out, so hit subscribe and let's conquer these exams together. Okay, let's get back to Alex and Sam. Okay, I am going to step in here and help Alex and Sam rewrite their deeply flawed section. I want you to look closely at the left side of the slide. Their initial draft is purely descriptive analysis. It says, issuing a bank loan raises the money needed, but it increases gearing. Rights issues raise money without increasing debt. Now, let's be honest. That is just listing facts. It's superficial breadth. It's going to score very, very low. The examiner reads that and thinks, okay, they know the definitions, but so what? Now look at the right side of the screen. We are going to apply a cognitive strategy to transition this into evaluative analysis. Let's rewrite it out loud together. While a $500,000 bank loan efficiently meets the immediate funding requirement, it pushes the company's gearing ratio from a safe 30% to a highly risky 65%. Assuming current interest rates remain volatile, this could severely impact future liquidity. Therefore, a rights issue, despite the potential for slight shareholder resistance, is relatively more appropriate as it shields the entity from mandatory crippling interest payments during an economic downturn. Do you see the massive difference there? We aren't just listing facts anymore. We are actively questioning assumptions about interest rates. We are using hard evidence, the 30% to 65% jump. And most importantly, we are making justified, comparative decisions. We are weighing the slight shareholder resistance of a rights issue against the crippling interest payments of a loan. That right there is a flawless, full-mark response.
Now that we've seen how it's done, let's move into part 3, Mastering Analytical Depth, with a pause and practice visual workshop. All right, it is your turn for an immersive visual workshop. I want you to treat this exactly like the real exam. Data interpretation skills are absolutely critical here. Imagine a 60-second visual countdown timer on your screen right now. You are presented with a complex text excerpt detailing a struggling business with plummeting cash reserves that is desperately looking to expand its operations. Let's systematically dissect a mock student's flawed response using the table on your screen to see exactly where they failed. Remember, practical application in sources of finance demands strict adherence to professional skills. First up in the table, apply formats. The flawed response we are imagining completely lacked clear headings. Presentation in accounting follows strict conventions. If you don't use proper headings to separate your arguments for a bank loan versus a share issue, you make the examiner work way too hard to find your logic, and an annoyed examiner is not a generous examiner. Next up, terminology. The student used highly informal phrasing like getting money from the bank instead of the professional accounting language like securing debt financing or utilizing an overdraft facility. It sounds amateurish. Finally, they failed to evaluate. They listed the pros and cons but didn't offer any justified recommendations at the end. Remember the ultimate problem-solving loop. Break the given information into logical steps, solve the math systematically, and then, crucially, make a firm, justified recommendation based on the precise scenario given. Don't leave the examiner hanging. Let's keep this momentum going into Part 4, Unlocking Evaluative Thinking, specifically looking at comparative analysis.
This is where we step into the absolute peak assessment domain. Those higher-order assessment objectives demand that you never, ever look at a source of finance in isolation. The examiner is literally begging to see an evaluation of alternatives and a head-to-head comparison of approaches. This brings us to the actual mechanical gears of comparative analysis. If you want full marks on a 15-mark evaluation question, you need to execute these 5 bullet points on screen flawlessly. First, identify similarities between the finance options. For instance, both a debenture and a long-term bank loan provide a sudden injection of capital. Second, identify the differences. The most obvious one is usually how they affect ownership and gearing. Third, and please write this down because this is where 80% of students fail, use comparative connectives. Words like whereas, conversely, in contrast, and on the other hand. These aren't just fancy vocabulary words, they are structural signposts. They explicitly signal to the examiner's brain that you are actively weighing options against each other. Fourth, support every single comparison with hard evidence directly from the data table provided in the exam. Don't say profits will go down, say net profit margin will decrease by 4%. And fifth, you must conclude on the relative importance. Don't just sit on the fence and say one is good and one is bad. You have to take a stand and say why one specific factor is more critical at this specific moment in time for this specific business than the other.
And that leads us perfectly into Part 5, the top 3 examiner traps. I call this the minefield.
Understanding how to structure an argument is great. It's essential, actually. But if you step on one of these landmines, which are pulled directly from the chief examiner reports, your score will completely plummet. So here is your survival guide. Trap number 1, vague answers. Candidates are so terrified of being wrong that they write these sweeping, generalized statements. The correction framework provides specific, precise details. If you mention that a source of finance is expensive, state the exact 8% interest rate given in the source text. Be bold with your data. Trap number 2, poor formatting. We talked about this. Students get rushed in the last 20 minutes of the exam and just scribble a massive unbroken wall of text. The correction, always check your presentation. Use headings, underline your key figures, leave a line of space between your points, and ensure your notation is clear. Trap number 3, the absolute deadliest of all, ignoring context. This happens all the time. A student will write a truly brilliant, perfectly memorized textbook answer about why a public share issue is the greatest way to raise capital, but they completely ignored the fact that the specific case study on page 2 explicitly stated that the company is a tight-knit family business whose founders absolutely refuse to give up any voting control to outsiders. By suggesting a share issue, you just proved you aren't reading the scenario. The correction framework requires you to anchor every single answer, every single recommendation to the specific constraints and realities of the scenario provided.
Before we wrap this session up, I want to give you a really powerful memory hack. When you are sitting in the pressure cooker of the exam hall, cognitive overload is a very real, very dangerous threat. Your brain just freezes. You need a way to instantly recall the specific factors affecting sources of finance without panicking. So create a personalized acronym, something that instantly triggers your memory to check the 5 major pillars: cost, control, risk, flexibility, and gearing, CCRFG. By having a mental checklist anchored to a simple acronym, you ensure that your evaluative paragraphs automatically cover a broad, comprehensive range of impacts. You won't have to actively stress out trying to remember what you might be forgetting, because the acronym does the heavy lifting for you.
And that brings us to the end of our Sources of Finance Masterclass. We have synthesized an enormous amount of strategy into 3 core memorable pillars today. You now have the 3-step question scan to instantly identify command words and constraints. You had the paragraph balance formula to ensure you actually transition from superficial description into deep comparative evaluation. And you have the last 5 minutes review checklist to catch those fatal formatting and context traps before time is up. Listen to me. Crushing Cambridge exams does not happen by accident. It isn't just about being naturally smart. It requires consistent, rigorous, and practiced strategy. So I want you to apply these frameworks immediately. Drop down into the comments right now and explicitly type out your target grade. Put it out there. And do not forget to hit that subscribe button for @acetheexam_IGCSC and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss our next exam hack. But before you click away, I want to leave you with one final provocative question to think about tonight. If your own business was facing a sudden, devastating economic crash tomorrow, would you reach for a bank loan or would you initiate a rights issue?
How you answer that might just be the difference between your business surviving and thriving. Think it over. See you in the next explainer.